This is it. This is the last part of the Analogue Space Mission course that we've been going through. Today I'll be just talking about the past, present and future of Analogue Space Missions, documentaries and any kind of side comments I might still have left about Analogue Space Mission. So we saw what the past was, how Analogue Space Mission started for the Apollo mission and Mercury mission, and how astronauts still use them. ESA, NASA, as a different space agency, still use analog missions. They're usually very high fidelity. And in the past 20-30 years, the civilian analog space mission have started developing. So initiatives from, for example, Mars Society have spread it out with FMARS, MDRS, that kind of facilities, and more are sprouting out. And one of the reasons for this is because there's a lot to learn from analog space mission, as we've seen, for both Earth, like sustainability, but also Mars exploration, moon exploration, basically human space exploration. A lot of the facilities are very interesting for people living in extreme environments, so in very remote regions with very harsh temperatures, for example, or whatever weather problems they might be facing, and it's extremely interesting to be digging into that. Also, as we've seen, it's now considered a different science because it's just such a huge topic. We can study the psychology, we can study the engineering systems, the life support systems, the habitats, the architecture, the crew itself, from both a medical standpoint, like physiological, but also psychological. There's so many that can be investigated. We could view, for example, a 500 people big analog mission and see, okay, are we able to recreate a civilization? What is going to happen? What are we going to do on Mars? Whom do we need? How many psychologists? How many pediatricians? And that kind of thing is very interesting and provides everyday knowledge in analog missions. So the future of analog space mission is just that they're gonna get bigger and bigger, but also there will be a very diverse crew. We're going to be welcome, for example, very young crews for training. So there's already a small initiative that was at Ecovivalis in Switzerland that was conducting a very small analog mission for kids between, I think it was age 10 to 12. There's obviously analog astronauts with now very diverse backgrounds. Before, you'd recruit astronauts who would only have a STEM background. Now you're thinking more of a civilization standpoint, so you have already, not you going, but you have already journalists, photographers, artists that don't have a STEM background, but simply have enough of the knowledge to be maintaining the base and to provide, support to the rest of the crew. So this diversity in crew is very interesting also for space. It completely changes from the original crews that we had on the Mir space station, Salyut, on the ISS, on the space shuttle, Apollo, Gemini mission. All of these, obviously, we all had a STEM background and we're pilots or both. And now we don't necessarily need that anymore. Once we're going to have settlements, we're going to have people who've got very much different backgrounds. And if we have civilization, you're going to need lawyers, you're going to need artists, everything that basically forms the whole of human civilization. And that's something that we can test with Analog Space Mission, and that makes it very interesting. We're going also to banalize access to space. Basically, there's so many space missions that you can train a lot of people, not necessarily to an extremely high standard. Doesn't mean that they fit to become astronauts right away. However, it's still making it way more accessible than the usual astronaut training program. Makes it also interesting for people to understand, okay, what is going to happen for space? What is the kind of behavior I'm supposed to have? What are the tasks are expected of me if I'm going to space? And that kind of banalizes, it kind of makes space more accessible to the general public and more understandable, because then you have not 10 people or 550 or 600 total astronauts in the world, but you have thousands and thousands of analog astronauts who are then being trained every year, and who can then talk to their families and their friends and to the media and make it more accessible and more understandable. So another thing that is going with Analog Space Mission, something that is I'm actually working on is to make Analogue Space Mission, a testing platform for para-astronauts. You may have seen that in 2021, when ESA made the last call for ESA astronauts, they made a call also for para-astronauts for the first time. Para-astronauts were supposed to have disabilities on the lower limb region, like missing a toe, or a leg shorter than the other one, or amputated, etc., etc. However, that's only one kind of disability. There's a lot of disabilities, and there's the argument that if you were to go to Mars and come back, it's very likely that you would experience a form of debilitation, handicap, because your cardiovascular system will be massively impacted by microgravity. You'll be exposed to quite a lot of radiation, so you might have cancer or some form of eye damage, because when you go to space, you tend to be subjected to eye damage that's not completely reversible. And also accidents, you might have something happens, and then unfortunately we have to amputate you, especially on Mars, where it's going to be extremely tough. Even if we pre-install settlements, we're still going to have to do a lot of labor work, and you might get injured. So you might go there as healthy as a horse, as we say, and come back and you might have 1, 2, or several handicaps. Okay, so understanding how a space mission can be conducted with handicaps is very interesting. And with analog space missions, what is quite interesting is that you can have a very diverse crew, you can have diverse habitats, you can have diverse durations of mission. With the International Space Station, at the moment you're limited to when do you have a launch, when is the crew rotation, who's next, how long is the experiment, yada yada yada. You have very tight constraints and who are very expensive. But in the world, as we've seen, so many civilian analog space missions mean that you could have diverse duration of missions. And for example, if you were to adapt an analog mission for somebody, for example, who is blind, like what was the case for Icarus 1 crew in 2017 and Lunaris Hub in Poland, as you can see on the picture. If you adapt for somebody who's blind, then you already see the changes like the first day. It doesn't take 2 weeks to see the changes. You need to adapt right away, because otherwise that person cannot perform the space mission correctly. And same if you have somebody in a wheelchair. Well, again, if your habitat is all like this, or has massive bumps, or is very narrow, it's not going to work for that person in a wheelchair. Obviously, you have different consequences. So for example, a person that was blind and missing an arm too, they were changing the profile of the habitat, so that person could feel the floor and know where they're going and where's the habitat, which module it is. In space, you wouldn't have that, obviously, because you'd be floating around, but you could imagine that on Mars we could do that, because we still have some form of gravity, reduced gravity, but we've got gravity, so we'd be walking on the surface, okay? And that means that you could use this kind of profile on the floor reference, but on the International Space Station that wouldn't work. So there are limitations in using analog space missions for these testing platforms. However, there's still a lot that can be done. And one simple thing is, for example, the communication between an able-bodied person to somebody with a handicap. So for example, if the Mission Control Center says, I need you to do this in 2 hours, for example. And the person says, no, it takes me an hour more because I need to roll around, or I take 30% more time to get something done because I cannot move around properly or as quick as somebody who's got 2 legs, for example, who's got all arms, all fingers, etc., etc. So you have to adapt, and you have to adapt communication protocol, sometimes protocol medium. For example, somebody who's blind obviously needs the instruction in braille or needs to have them in audio. Somebody who's deaf, for example, will need no audio communication with MCC but text messages. So you need to have this diversity of platform. And there's so many disabilities that can be tested. There's so many ways an astronaut can get those disabilities, okay? And before you say, well, why would we have anyone with disability in space? Well, there's obviously the coming back from Mars with a disability, but there's also the fact that people with disabilities are used to have to adapt to a world that is not made for them on a daily basis. And they might actually adapt to space much quicker than astronauts without disabilities, okay? Also, they might be less affected, for example, by microgravity. If you don't have your legs, then you don't have as much as a fluid shift in your body, and you might not be as subjected and unhealthy when you come back to Earth. So it's actually quite interesting to see that. How would we adapt quicker? How would we be potentially better astronauts by having those disabilities, which in space are referred to as hyper abilities? It's very interesting, and you can also think about the fact that if you do have a Martian settlement, then you're going to have people who might be born there, and they might be born with those disabilities. So you anyway need to train these things, and analog space missions are the way. So for example, Lunaris Research Station is currently making a crew call. So today it's beginning of March 2023, and they're making a crew call for power astronauts, well, a mixed crew, but also mixed crew with a power astronaut. So very, very interesting. A lot of progress will be made there. Another thing that is going on for analog space mission is the standardization of analog space missions. At the moment, when you do a space mission, as I mentioned it at the beginning of this course, you do have large differences between a certain space mission, from a duration, from how good the simulation is compared to space, from the crew selection, from the habitat, from the experiments. There's really huge variability. So when you say I'm an analog astronaut, it doesn't necessarily have the same meaning depending if you've done that mission or that mission or that mission. And also the way you behaved. You could have behaved really badly, and so having standards for analog missions, or showing, well, from an experiment standpoint that mission is very good, or from a habitat standpoint it's very good, from an EVA standpoint it's very good, from space use handling, donning, doffing methodology in use, it's very good. You can already express better, okay, this is actually the experiences I have, the skills I have, the competencies that I developed in those missions. And it also means that when you go and talk to your employer, because obviously most of us do this on a voluntary basis, when you come and talk to your employer, you can say, actually, this are the certifications that I did get, and they can understand it's actually much more serious than what they might think. Obviously, a lot of them are very, very serious missions. A lot of them are worth doing, but having the standardization is interesting. So the committee was formed last fall, October 2023, if I remember correctly, and is now in development for this standardization of analog missions in the world. And then, so this is the privileged society I'm running. So this is CHASM, the Community on Human Analog Space Mission. We've been able to do some conferences and wikis, and we're also doing workshops where we try to discuss between ourselves, of participants of analog space mission, and try to bring the standards also up simply by talking together how we do stuff. So for example, spacesuits or habitats or life support systems or experiments, how do we select them? What are some of the problems that we encounter? Where do we find the money? Is that thing essential or not? And this discussion with people from all around the world is really, really helping foster communication, and also we get to visit different bases. And by creating a wiki, we're trying to also create public knowledge. So hopefully in the next couple of years, people will be able to access right away the information on analog space mission using our wiki and accessing the conference recordings and that sort of things. But there's other ways to actually get more public knowledge, and it's actually via documentaries. So I'm not gonna play the whole video here, but just to give you an idea, I put a few documentaries on the slides. You should be able to access them. There's not all analog space missions have been filmed, or sometimes the movies are difficult to access, but these are a way to give you a small idea of analog missions.
The Martian invasion in his 1897 novel War of the Worlds, the Red Planet has captured our imaginations. At over 33 million miles away, it's incredible to think we could one day colonize Mars. But if you harbor dreams of being a space explorer, there are options out there here on Earth. So for the next 24 hours, I'll be learning how to live life like a Mars colonist in Spain. Astroland is a project set up to see how humans would potentially cope living on Mars from a psychological perspective. This is the bit I've actually been waiting for. my very own spacesuit.
I'm ready for my ascent into Martian land. I'm a little bit scared too. How's this?
Our aim is to get to Ares, our base, where we will be spending the night. It's anticipated that the first colonists to Mars will also have to live underground in caves or lava tubes to avoid interstellar radiation. And there's no time to waste on the experiments.
Okay, so I'm collecting some samples of the water that's trickling from above. It's really quite cool.
There you go. So it gives you an idea of the Ares station of Astronaut Interplanetary Agency in Spain. You can see more obviously on YouTube. So just put Astroland, BBC Travel, or Spain Recreating Life on Mars in a Cave in Spain, and you'd be able to watch the whole video. Then you've got another documentary that just came out. That just came out, which is with the Austrian Space Forum, and it's called Being on Mars. It's a real thing. It's about hour 20, and you can also find it on YouTube. It's about an hour 20 long. Very, very interesting, incredible images. So if you need a little push to get motivated about space, that's the way to go. So again, just put it on YouTube. The other video that you can find on YouTube is High Seas in Hawaii. It's a few minutes long video, but it actually shows you the habitat, what the spacesuits look like, what is the daily life. It's actually subtitled in French, but it's in English, so it's accessible to you all. Again, High Seas Hawaii, or High Seas Analogue Space Mission, and you'll find it right away. Very easy to put in. And lastly, we got two other documentaries. One is a series of few minutes about following hours. It's sadly in Polish. It was filmed by TVN24 channel. If you speak Polish, then feel free to look at it. Sadly, it doesn't have any subtitles in English or in other languages, but it's still nice to see how the inside of the base and the kind of visit. And Ascopus 2 mission has also about an hour documentary that was made for the Swiss Italian TV and radio, and it's in Italian. But again, it gives you an idea of where the Ascopus 2 space mission took place. So, what can I do now? I can wish you happy analoguing. Don't forget that you can take part in analog space missions in different ways than just as an analog astronaut. You can send any kind of research, you can help develop the habitat, you can work on the logistics, you can work on the life support systems, you can be an architect, you can be a journalist, you can be a photographer, you can be a designer working on a spacesuits, for example. There is an absolutely huge variety of things that you can do with analog space missions, anything that you can test. It's just about, preparing your experiment, preparing what you think is necessary, what you think would be interested to look at, and sending them. You now have not an exhaustive but a quite large list of analog space missions where you can apply to or that you can contact. Usually some websites used to not be translated. This is something that is now improving the past years. You can really see an effort ramping up into making analog missions more accessible and visible. Sometimes the website might be in original language, but still people are making an effort, and you should be able to access what you need. If you do not, do get in touch with me. I can see if I can put you in touch with the right people. But I do wish you to take part in analog missions. It's absolutely fantastic experiences. It's an incredible moment of your life, and it's, I think, a good preparation for many things that may come in your life, both from a team building perspective, from a human perspective, understanding yourself, understanding others, learning how to lead people and how to deal with any kind of dangerous situations. From a scientific standpoint, very, very interesting. Lots of experiments that you get to perform, even if you're not necessarily a biologist. You might get to do biology experiments, or if you're not a trained chemist, you might do chemistry. you learn a lot of things like this. And then you also have to be a very good roommate. If you're a bad roommate, then, you know, so you learn how to not necessarily do your bad military style, but you learn how to be a better human in general. And I really wish for as many people as possible to take part in Analogue space mission, because I really think that it would better both space exploration but the world in general. It's been a pleasure teaching this. I do hope that it was satisfactory. It's likely that some of the data, some of the things I said might become incomplete, not necessarily obsolete, but incomplete with time. And my apologies for this. It's a very much changing world, but hopefully it gives you a strong basis for you to build your own mission, to understand more, and to get excited about space. Ad astra.